Yes, go ahead.
I'd like, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming to tonight's City Council, Albany City Council meeting on Wednesday, December 1st, 2021 at 6 p.m. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And Maryland, Councilor Smith, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Councilor Smith. Okay, roll
Welcome.
call, please.
Councilor Smith.
Present.
Yes, thank you. Councilor Olson.
Here.
Councilor Novak.
Here.
Councilor Bartholomew.
Present.
Councilor Kopczynski.
Here.
Councilor Johnson.
Here.
Mayor Johnson II.
Here. So tonight we have a public hearing, housing options / House Bill 2001 Comprehensive Plan and Development Code updates, CP 0321-DC02 2021 APG. Matthew Ruckers will be Matthew Ruckers and Catlin. And on the public hearing, I'll go ahead and open that now. Tonight's agenda, we did that. The applicant is the City of Albany Community Development Department. I call to order this public hearing at 6:02 p.m. Do any members wish to declare a conflict of interest? If so, they should disqualify themselves. None being told. Do any members wish to abstain from participating in the proceeding? Seeing none. If you wish to testify, there are two options available, which were described in the council agenda and the notice materials. For those wishing to testify, please be aware that you must raise an issue with enough detail to afford the city council and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue if you later want to raise the issue and appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the approval standard staff, which describe or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or development code which you believe to apply to the decision. If additional documentation or evidence are provided to any party, by any party, the commission may allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties to a reasonable opportunity to respond. At this time, I'll call on the staff report. And Catlin.
Can you hear me okay?
Much better.
Okay, I'm using my phone. So thank you, Mayor and councilors. And as you, most of you know this already, but in case there are members in the audience, the Expanding Housing Options Project is part of a broader effort on the part of the City of Albany to address housing affordability and related issues facing the city. Kate, can you advance the slide? This project is intended to do a few different things. We hope that it'll improve housing choices in the short term and hopefully housing affordability in the long term. But one of the primary purposes for this project is to comply with House Bill 2001, which I'll talk about in a future slide, which requires the city to allow middle housing types in residential areas. We're also trying to comply with Senate Bill 458, which will allow middle housing land divisions. And then we still had a few items on a long list of code updates, which included establishing clear and objective standards for some of our other housing types. So that's essentially the purpose of this amendment package. Next slide. So for the purposes of the audience, most of you are probably familiar with middle housing by now, but for those of you that aren't, the slide shows you the different housing types that are considered middle housing as it relates to this project. It includes duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. Next slide. So House Bill 2001 was adopted by the Oregon legislature back in 2019 in response to concerns about the availability of housing choices within communities. And over time, you may have recognized that many cities across the country have, after the World War II especially, sort of went away from traditional downtown mixed-use type development to having single-family zoning and multifamily zoning. And because of that and other issues, many cities no longer have that middle housing type, which is often referred to as middle housing. So cities that are 25,000 in population or larger are required to allow duplexes on any lot or parcel zoned for single family. And then we also must allow triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses in areas zoned for single family dwellings as well. Next slide. So House Bill 2001 is fairly prescriptive, and we have been working on this project for about a year, and it was about a year ago that we started looking at where Albany could tailor some of the standards to Albany that would allow for a little deviation. So the bill allows us to regulate siting and design of middle housing, but only so long as those standards do not result in unreasonable cost or delay. And then their DLCD, which is Department of Land Conservation and Development, adopted a model code which cities can borrow standards from, and the city used that as a starting point to look at these siting standards for middle housing. And then if we do not adopt our standards locally, the model code will automatically apply by June 30th, 2022. So we are ahead of the game. There's time still to do this, but this is, again, the first step in multiple different things that we're trying to do to address housing issues and housing affordability. Next slide. So why are we doing this? Well, not just because of House Bill 2001. Hopefully you can still hear me, sorry. The housing needs analysis, which we adopted back in 2020, shows that Albany is projected to have 2,600 households by 2040 looking for middle housing types. And those middle housing types might be affordable to those households. So we are projected to need these housing types. Next slide. Our construction trends show what I talked about a little bit earlier, that most of our housing permits in the last decade have been either for single family detached or for multifamily developments. We've had very little middle housing types. Next slide. And lastly, if you see the colors on this map, the light yellow and light green areas are areas that are designated for single family development, and the orangish brown areas are multifamily. And really most of our buildable land only allows for single family detached housing. And that's created a gap in not providing middle housing in Albany. So before we start getting into some of the details, I do want to let you know that the staff report findings are in Exhibit C to the ordinance. And Kate, if you could pull up the next slide. I just wanted to hit the review criteria that are applicable for comprehensive plan amendments and development code amendments. Essentially, amendments must be consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan, the purposes of the comprehensive plan, the statewide planning goals, applicable purpose statements, and then of course comply with state law and new laws. Next slide. As I mentioned, we have been working on this project for a year or so, about a year. You may remember that there have been 6 different work sessions between the Planning Commission and City Council, which served as the advisory committee for this project. We did do what we think was a fairly successful online survey and outreach. We had over 300 responses. through the website. We had 200 plus people on our interested parties list. And I think the effort that I thought was most rewarding for me on staff was our focus groups. We had 4 small focus groups with residents representing a variety of different backgrounds. We got a lot of input, and that input was brought back to you all as part of the project advisory committee to help us determine those few areas where the House Bill 2001 allows for local considerations. So then, of course, there is this public process through the legislative public hearing process, and we did advertise the hearing as required by state law, and try to notify everyone on our lists about these upcoming hearings, and we're here today. Next slide. So the comprehensive plan amendments are the first set of amendments, just a few minor amendments in Exhibit A to the ordinance. Kate, next slide. These are focused in 2 chapters of the comprehensive plan. We just want to make a few minor updates to the policies to expand them to be to encourage middle housing types and other smaller, lower cost housing types. And then we needed to update the descriptions of the low density residential and medium density residential comprehensive plan designations to be consistent with the middle housing. And that's it for the comprehensive plan. And next slide is the launching the development code amendments, which is found in Exhibit B. And as you know, these amendments touch almost every article of the development code. And I'm going to hand it over to Angelo Planning Group. We were delighted to have a grant that enabled us to hire the consultant team from Angelo Planning Group, Kathy Corliss and Kate Rogers, and they have helped us get through this process, and I will hand it over to them for the next part of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Kathy Corliss, I'm a principal with Angelo Planning Group, and very happy to be here tonight. And as most of you know and could see from the packet, most of the proposed amendments are to the Albany Development Code. And Kate, next slide, please. So as required by House Bill 2001, middle housing must be allowed in all residential and mixed-use zones that meet the state's definition of areas zoned for residential use that allow the development of a single-family detached dwelling. So in consultation with the LCD, we've come to understand that this definition applies not only to residential zones where single-family homes are permitted, but also to the MUR and MUC mixed-use zones. And when we refer to these zones as a group, and there's a definition for this as well in the code, we call those middle housing zoning districts. So when we say middle housing zoning districts, we mean all of these zones that are directly subject to the HB 2001 requirements. Next slide, thank you. So the proposed amendments make middle housing types permitted uses in middle housing zoning districts and RMA. The RMA district, which is the city's highest density residential zone, is proposed to be updated so that the middle housing allowances are consistent across the residential zones. And next slide. The development standards in the zoning districts are proposed to be updated for consistency with HB 2001 and the OARs. The amendments to the design standards in Article 8 are proposed as to be updated as well. So currently, the single-family design standards in Article 8 apply to single-family homes, manufactured homes, duplexes, 2 detached dwellings on a lot, and townhouses. The standards regulate home orientation and street-facing windows, and also include a special set of standards called infill and redevelopment standards. As allowed by the OAR, the amendments would continue to apply the home orientation and window standards to duplexes and townhouses, and also apply them to the other middle housing types as well. However, the infill standards themselves do not comply with the OAR for middle housing. And so the city cannot apply them to any middle housing type. For example, those standards require garages in some circumstances, and the OAR precludes jurisdictions from requiring garages, require parking space, but not a garage. So therefore, they, after much consideration and discussion, because the infill standards can't be applied to middle housing, only to single family homes, we would recommend that you delete them altogether so that it doesn't put, it creates a level playing field across those housing types. Also, as we've previously discussed, the standards have been somewhat challenging for staff to implement and for the people applying them to implement. And as part of a separate ADC project, the staff, consultants, and the task force recommended removing them altogether. I also heard that, and again, this is just the feedback that we've received, is that the standards haven't had much impact. There's some special setback and height standards. They don't end up having a lot of impact on development. The standard that does is the one that requires garages in some circumstances, which, as I noted, can't be applied to middle housing. So for example, if you kept it for single family, you would be requiring garage for single family, but the same development with a duplex would not be required to have a garage. So that was the reason that we recommended deleting those. The other issue is that, and the reason for retaining the other standards was that a majority of the respondents to, as Ann mentioned, we did a survey, and there was a lot of support for requirements for the main entrance to face the street and requirements for street facing windows. So those are recommended to be retained and applied more broadly. Next slide. So for townhouses, one area of local flexibility is that cities can choose to limit how many townhouses are allowed to be attached within a single structure, as long as it's at least 4 units allowed per structure. And so for the sake of compatibility with other residential development, the concept that's in the proposed amendments is to limit the number of attached townhouses per structure and to vary that limit based on the zoning districts so that fewer attached units per building are allowed in lower density zones and more in higher density zones. The current code does not include such a limit for townhouses. So that's a change as well. Next slide, please. So for triplexes, fourplexes, the additional proposed design standards focus on the width of garages and parking and driveway widths and access. These standards are intended to help reduce the impact of additional, more frequent driveways, both on the pedestrian, on the sidewalk, as well as on on-street parking. And then for townhouses, the proposed standards also address driveway access and driveway width and spacing and unit articulation. Cottage clusters, there are a whole set of new design standards for cottage clusters that address cottage orientation, common courtyard area design, community buildings, pedestrian access, and parking design. I would note that there have been some final recommended refinements to several of these standards, primarily related to driveway spacing, and these came about following the Planning Commission's hearing and recommendation. And so we will note those. Kate, next slide, please. So one of the refinements that we are proposing, that came about following the Planning Commission's hearing and recommendation, and this is reflected in your packet, in the amendments that you received in Exhibit B, is to modify the driveway spacing standard somewhat. And so this is, we received some public input, and through that input, we took a closer look at the OARs and had some conversations with DLCD staff, well, email conversations at any rate. And based on that input, we're proposing a new approach. And again, it's in your, this is new from the Planning Commission's recommendation, but it's in your packet. This is a section 8.140. And the general rule, of course, is that middle housing cannot be stricter than the model code or the standards that apply to single family detached, unless the city can demonstrate that the additional requirements will not discourage middle housing through unreasonable cost or delay. So given all of that, we've updated this section to apply to single family and middle housing. And at the same time, have made it more flexible, but while still addressing community concerns about parking. And so if the way that the wording would work is that if 2 off-street parking spaces are provided, they do not have to, the 22-foot spacing standard, which was intended to preserve an on-street parking space, would not apply. And so it does, while the standard would apply to single family detached dwellings, those provide 2 parking spaces. So the additional requirements are would have no effect necessarily, since they're already providing 2 off-street parking spaces. But for developments that are not providing 2 off-street parking spaces, the standard would seek to protect some on-street parking, because we did hear that parking is a concern in the community, and we're trying to be sensitive to that issue while providing flexibility. So that change is, again, a slight change since the Planning Commission's recommendation. And then next slide, there's an additional change, also based on some feedback that we heard from the community, which was helpful. And it is in the supplemental agenda attachment, and the changes are highlighted in yellow. And you'll see most of those are very minor clarifications. However, again, based on some public comment, we took a second look at the paired driveway requirement that was applying to townhouses and realized it might have create an unintended barrier to townhouses in the middle housing zone, or pardon me, middle housing zones. And therefore, we've proposed a further change to the amendments. So an amendment to the amendments. And that's again noted in the supplemental agenda. But it does provide more flexibility and does not require paired driveways in every circumstance. So with that, I think next we'll move to cottage cluster. Right. Very good. So thank you, Kate. As you know, HB 2001 requires cities like Albany to allow middle housing such as cottage cluster developments. And the code amendments would allow middle housing developments to be on a single lot. And in this conceptual example, there are 8 cottages with surrounding a common courtyard. We've had a number of questions about how cottage clusters could work. This is just a very conceptual example. For example, the cottages could have individual garages, individual driveways going to them. So if you could picture perhaps a loop road going, or a driveway going around it, and so that individual cottages have their own garages and their own individual vehicle access. That is not precluded by the code. However, they could also have shared parking, as is shown in this. But the idea of a cottage cluster being allowed with a shared courtyard, there are size limits and so forth that apply to that. And then Kate, next slide. Cities have some flexibility to limit the size of cottage clusters and the size of individual units within cottage clusters, although the OAR does place some sideboards on that flexibility. So as a reminder, the groupings, the maximum footprint is 900 square feet. That is the kind of the ground floor footprint. So that doesn't necessarily limit the overall square footage, but it does limit the size of the ground floor. And so that's one standard, that 900 square foot footprint. Cities can't vary from that, although there are some exceptions to allow an attached garage. But in addition to that 900 square foot footprint limit, the proposed amendments include both a maximum floor area, that's the total square footage, for example, if you were to have a second story, and an average maximum. And the intent of that, and you may recall some of the conversations that we had during work sessions about that, but the intent and what we were responding to was an interest to try and encourage a variety of sizes and designs within each cluster, and also to limit the overall size of individual cottage to ensure that they're, in general, smaller than the typical single family house, and perhaps in that way enable more affordable units, but within each cluster to have a range of sizes and encourage that. So standards are designed to do that. Let's see, next slide, Kate. And again, one more on cottage cluster, just again to note that, because there has been some confusion about this, that a parking space must be provided for each cottage, that these can be in individual spaces, attached or detached garages, shared parking, any combination of those things. So some units could have attached garages and other units could have shared parking. You know, there is a lot of flexibility in that option. Again, there's a limit on the size of the footprint of each cottage, but there is an exception to allow an additional 200 square feet for an attached garage, although the area of the garage is included in the floor area total. It's not included in the footprint limit. I think it's a subtle point, but important when you're designing the cottage and trying to keep the scale appropriate for cottage design. Okay, I think that's all for cottages. And let's talk a little bit about the historic district overlay. So the Middle Housing OAR allows cities to apply the same Goal 5 historic resource regulations that it applies to detached single family dwellings, to apply the same to middle housing as it applies to single family detached dwellings in the same zone. There are two exceptions to that. So use, density, and occupancy restrictions that prohibit the development of middle housing on historic properties or in districts that would otherwise permit the development of detached single family dwellings aren't allowed. You can't do those. And nor are there any standards that prohibit the development of middle housing on historic properties or districts that otherwise permit the development of detached single family. So if you have a design standard that talks about roof pitched or window type or something like that, those can continue to be applied. They can apply to single family. If they apply to single family, they can be applied to middle housing in that same zone. However, a standard that impacts the use or the density or occupancy, if it's you could not restrict middle housing in that way. But the city's historic district doesn't do that. So there were no concerns on that point, but just wanting to point that out. Okay, thank you, Kate. Next slide, manufactured homes. So the packet includes amendments to the manufactured home regulations. These are not required by HB 2001. However, like all residential development, manufactured homes and manufactured home parks must be allowed through clear and objective review path according to state law. And currently Article 10, which is the regulations that regulate manufactured homes, contains some standards and review criteria. They're not entirely clear and objective. And so as a part of this effort, amendments to Article 10 are proposed. What we've tried to do, and this is again based on discussions we had during the work sessions, but to retain and revise the most important kind of compatibility criteria, and then remove any unnecessary or outdated standards. And then for manufactured home parks, to try and revise discretionary or unclear language to be clear and objective, to add more detail, and to clarify open space and recreation requirements. Okay. Thank you, Kate. So a companion bill to HB 2001 was signed into law in June of 2021, and that's called SB 458. And it says that starting on July 1st, 2022, large cities like Albany are required to allow middle housing will also be required to allow those middle housing developments to be subdivided. And that change, that more recent change, as part of SB 458, necessitated additional modifications to the draft amendments. And these were primarily to Article 11. So the version that you have includes those, and we've been in discussions with the city attorney over on those regulations, and they include the procedures that apply to middle housing land divisions are the same as the pre-existing or existing procedures that would have applied to an expedited land division. And so we've also addressed expedited land divisions a little bit more fully than was previously done. The code had a reference to the state laws related to expedited land divisions, and we've gone ahead and included those requirements in the code itself, mostly just to make it easier for the planners and the applicants who are going to be looking at this not to have to turn to back and forth between the requirements in the Oregon Revised Statute and Albany's Development Code. So we think that it's going to make it easier for them to implement these requirements. And next slide, Kate. Going back to my example of the cottage cluster, the change is to implement SB 458, mean that an individual cottage could be on its own lot. And this would be true with a triplex or a fourplex, a duplex. And this is an extremely conceptual example and probably not to scale, and certainly not to scale. The pink lines, however, would be the lot lines for individual parcels. And the blue shaded area in this example would be the common areas that could be in a shared tract. And again, you know, it's the idea being that you could, once you have a cottage cluster development, if you wanted to go through a middle housing land division, it's an expedited process to do that. And therefore the individual cottages could be on their own lots. And there are some very specific requirements and standards around how those lots get processed. It's not a standard subdivision, but the end result is individual lots with either cottages or, for example, if it's a duplex, you know, it would basically be each half a duplex would be on its own lot. And there are building code requirements that apply and so forth. So obviously somebody building a duplex needs to keep, if they're intending to divide, would need to keep that in mind because, you know, there are requirements when dividing. So, but this, again, very conceptual idea here. And then keeping on the subject of subdivisions, Kate, next slide. Currently, large subdivisions are those over 20 lots, and cluster developments are subject to type 3 review. With the change to clear and objective standards and criteria for residential subdivision in particular, the recommendation was to change these to a staff decision. Again, you may recall that conversation from our work sessions. The approach we discussed was to require type 2. We've discussed that further with the city attorney, and it appears that both should be classified as limited land use decisions. That's per ORS 197.015. And in Albany, that means it's a type 1L process, although both type 2 and type 1L are staff's decisions. So it's not substantively a lot different from what we discussed previously. And then cluster developments, those are optional and there's still quite a bit of discretion. So those are going to be, the proposed amendments show those as a type 3 process still. And then, Kate, next slide, thank you. Finally, plan developments. One of the things that was suggested was to, early on in this process, was to amend the plan development requirements to make plan developments a more useful and flexible tool for a broader range of innovative developments. And so the proposed amendments would retain the 25% open space, but allow reductions to no less than 15% if an applicant can demonstrate that the open space is appropriate to the scale and character of the PD or plan development. And also there are some changes to facilitate cottage cluster plan developments. Now with the change related to SB 458. Oh, somebody's holding up a.
This is my counselors. Go ahead, keep going.
Oh, okay, sorry. Wrapping it up here. Facilitate the cottage cluster PDs. Again, that's probably not going to be used as much now that SB 458 has been passed, but it still provides an element of flexibility that we thought was worth retaining. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Anne. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Kathy. I just wanted to wrap up our staff report findings and conclusions, just hit a few highlights. And mostly, middle housing is going to provide housing that was identified as needed housing in our 2020 housing needs analysis. It will provide more housing choices, we hope, and support statewide planning goal 10 and our Albany Comprehensive Plan housing goals and policies. The amendments will also support the efficient use of land and services within the city, which supports state and local goals and policies. And remember that the development must still comply with all of our overlay districts. We've already talked about the historic overlay district, but new development must comply with our natural resource districts and floodplain. All of those standards would still apply, and those are important resources and statewide planning goals to comply with. So we are excited that we are able to include the Senate Bill 458 amendments to allow middle housing land divisions with this package. It was a little bit of a delay, but we think it will create that ownership opportunity that we keep hearing about, ownership of different housing types besides single family detached in Albany. And then the amendments to provide clear and objective criteria for the residential developments and the manufactured home park standards, as well as for the subdivision criteria, will comply with state law, as well as the whole package of amendments complying with House Bill 2001 and Senate Bill 458. So in summary, we feel the amendments are consistent with the applicable review criteria and also the purpose statements, and staff recommends approval of the proposed amendment package. Next slide. I think we're ready for questions of staff. Just for those in the audience, I just wanted to say that this would become effective 30 days from adoption, and just questions of staff on the staff report, if there are any, before we open the public hearing. And I will say a few people have had a few challenges getting into the Zoom meeting. I'm trying to send out links right now to make sure that we have those people online.
Thank you, Ann. So at this time, do any counselors have any clarifying questions regarding the staff report? And the first hand up was from Councilor Smith, and then Councilor Kopczynski, and then Councilor Johnson, and then Councilor Novak, and Councilor Bartholomew.
Thank you, Your Honor. Two questions from me. The first is, I would like staff to give us just a quick bullet point description of what the types of review are and who does that review and who is the decision maker, all the way from staff decisions to the review that requires a public hearing. That's my first question.
Sure, I would be happy to take that, Councilor Smith. So starting with type 1s, those are staff level, actually administrative decisions. There is no analysis required. It's mostly checklist. It meets this height, this setback, and typically those are building permits or partitions, some of our very minor land use kinds of applications. The next level up is called limited land use, and it's abbreviated as type 1-L. And those are types that have a little bit of discretion, and we notify the neighbors, typically 300 feet, sometimes 1,000 feet if it's a larger development or we think that it may have a larger impact. And those are still a staff level decision. And I'll take the chance to input that you can appeal a type 1L decision, and most of those appeals now are local to the either the Planning Commission or the Hearings Board or the Landmarks Commission. Certain types would be appealable to LUBA, Land Use Board of Appeals. So then the type 2 decision is it is another limited land use decision, but it's a staff decision, but we mail the notice of decision out to everyone in the notice area. And I didn't clarify this in the type 1L decision, but we just mail the notice of decision of staff's decision out to people that provided comments and have standing. Where in a type 2 land use, we mail the notice out to everyone in the notice area and give them a chance to evaluate staff's decision and staff report, and then schedule it for a public hearing. So moving on to type 3, those are quasi judicial land use decisions. And those are scheduled with a public hearing, either Planning Commission, Hearings Board, or Landmarks Advisory Commission. And those groups are the decision maker. The notice area is 300 feet or 1,000 feet, and sometimes 100 feet in some of the historic situations. And staff does a staff report, but those review bodies make the decision, and their decisions are appealable to the city council. And then there is the type 4, there are 2 types. There is the quasi judicial type 4, which would be typically somebody other than a city department would be bringing forward a request for a zone change, for example. So the quasi judicial version of a type 4 goes to the Planning Commission first, but if Planning Commission, they could deny it and then it wouldn't move to council. But of course it could be appealed to council. So a legislative type 4 process, which is what we are currently in, the council is the decision maker. So if Planning Commission did not like this package of code amendments and they said, you know, we recommend council deny it, it wouldn't have stopped there. It still would come to you for a public hearing. So typically these are amendments to the development code, the zoning map, the comprehensive plan, or comprehensive plan map. I think I got those right, and feel free to correct me if it maybe Kathy or Kate, but I think I covered all of those and be happy to answer any more questions about the process, different types. Those are Article 1 of the development code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Counselor Kopczynski.
Lower my hand here. I'd like to, if don't have this all mucked up, I'd like to remind everybody that there's nothing that absolutely requires a developer to actually do any of these. It's just giving them the opportunity to do that, and it's removing some of the barriers that would allow them to make some of the denser infill requirements as required by the state. And we're able to make some recommendations and changes that allow some of those things to happen a little bit easier, if I've got that correct.
Is it correct? And Catlin, go away.
Yeah, I can speak. I was trying to nod my head, but I turned my camera back on. Yes, that's correct.
Is that it, Counselor Kopczynski? Counselor Johnson, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, there's a lot of information here, so I just want to go back to slide 28. Now, is there a minimum lot size for the cluster housing? No, they have to be a certain amount, but I just wondered, is there a minimum minimum lot size that has to be there for the cluster development?
Yes, Bessie, and let me try to find the page for everybody's benefit in Article 3, where most of the residential zones are. There is a minimum lot size for each type of middle housing except for duplexes. Duplexes can go on any existing legally established lot that would allow a single family residence. So the table that has those minimum lot sizes is on page 80 of your council packet. It is table 3.190-1, and I can tell you that the minimum lot size for cottage cluster is 7,000 square feet in most zones except 10,000 square feet in the RS10 zone. And a reminder, you saw pictures of 8 cottages around a courtyard, but you can have as few as 3 cottages around a courtyard. I would imagine it would be fairly challenging to put even, super tiny cottages on a 7,000 square foot lot. So
Yeah,
I hope that
agreed.
answered your question.
Yes, it really did. And after you said that, I had gone down, but I just passed right across it. So thank you very much.
Mhm.
Thank you, Counselor Johnson. Counselor Novak, you were next up.
Thank you. I just could use some clarification, please, regarding the suggestions that were made by Mr. Robinson and the things that were highlighted in yellow. Are we looking at, those are changes to the amendment? Those are modifications that we're looking at approving?
Yeah, I apologize for the confusion. The great or interesting comments we received caused us to, as Kathy mentioned, revisit the law to see whether some of our standards are in compliance. And the first letters that Mr. Robinson submitted, which were in your packet that you received last week, the driveway spacing issue has been addressed. That was one of his concerns. He submitted an additional letter that you received today that, and I'll try to paraphrase it and he will be testifying. There still is a maximum driveway width and also percentage for triplexes and fourplexes so that we retain some front yard green space. So in the Article 8 design standards, there is currently a requirement that a triplex or fourplex, the driveway width can't exceed 50% of the lot frontage. So if you have four attached, let's just say a fourplex, and they're 20-foot wide units, I was going to say lots, but that'd be a townhouse, but a fourplex, let's just go with a 20-foot wide unit. It's an 80-foot wide lot. You could have 40 feet in driveway width. And Mr. Robinson has shared with us that many driveways and garage doors are 12 feet wide. And so he is requesting that you consider up to 60% of that frontage to be allowed to be driveways. Now, you could, so the measurement is actually at the property line. You could have a 10-foot wide driveway that flares out a little bit as you get to the garage. And then the other piece of that is that in the standards, we also limit the amount of driveway to 40 feet. So his part 2 of that is, could you allow the maximum driveway amount to be 48 feet? So that it would allow for 4 12-foot wide driveways and if you had a fourplex. So it is a little bit different. The other big issue that he brought up in his earlier letters has been addressed regarding driveway spacing. So he would no longer be required to pair driveways and do mirrored units. And
Okay.
sorry for the confusion. We like to include the testimony that was presented at the Planning Commission, as well as what additional testimony was received. So we were able to find that that spacing requirement was going to take a lot more work to justify it. And we found that we don't need it if we require more parking or actually exempt them from that standard if they provide 2 on-site spaces, because the purpose of that was really to protect a space on the street, that 22-foot spacing. Does that answer your question?
It helps a lot. Yes, I don't have complete clarity. I probably never will, but I was concerned about the design plan aspect, and he had mentioned that not having to do that mirroring, which is the, I guess, older way of designing a duplex, triplex, whatever, so that you'd have a greater degree of quiet for the people who are inhabiting those dwellings. I just thought it made sense, and I hope we are considering those suggestions. Thank you.
Those suggestions are in the packet. That's already happening. He was
Thank
just
you.
asking for 1 additional or 2 additional changes that are not included in the bold and strike language that you have, but the driveway spacing is.
You good, Counselor Novak?
Yes, sir.
Excellent, thank you. Counselor Bartholomew, you're next up.
Thank you. And you addressed one of my questions when you answered Counselor Novak. But I noticed on a discrepancy on page 155 of our packet, and it's under 10.2802AVI. And it says, it uses the term, it was measuring trees, how big around the trees are. And it was using the term breast height instead of 4.5 feet high, which is what it had used in all the other previous descriptions of trees.
What page was that, Councilor Bartholomew?
Page 155 of the packet.
Yeah, I see that, and we could switch that over. I think we were just trying to use language that is in the multifamily design standards, but I understand your point, and if that is a change that you would like us to address, we could.
I was just trying to maintain consistency. That's what we're trying to do. Is that correct?
Well, this is sort of a little additional area where we were just trying to
Yeah.
provide clear and objective standards. So it's sort of not related to the middle housing. So right now my brain is in middle housing and not in where we measure the tree diameter. So I'm still just trying to make sure I've got the right space, but on page 155, so you said 1.2802A2. Did you say 2A little 2 or little
VI.
Oh,
or
VI. Okay, gotcha. Now I see it.
There you go.
And if I might, I
Mhm.
think that 4.5 feet is the standard typically when people are measuring it DBH or, diameter breast height. I believe it's 4.5 feet is the typical. So it's probably more correct to use the specific measurement.
So we could add that to the amendments if that's council's pleasure. To just modify that to the actual 4.5 feet.
So you're gonna replace it, right, or add it?
Well, we would replace the existing language. Yeah, we would replace breast with 4.5 feet.
I support that. Councilor Smith, you have a question?
I do. Just a comment on the tree height, that I was going to compliment the staff and the consultants for their work on the clear and objective language throughout the document. A couple of them jumped out at me. One that I made a note of was in 10.2703B, page 153 of the document. They changed the description of a long expanse of fence. Long is open to interpretation, but that's been changed to an expansive fence no longer than X amount of feet. That's clear and objective. And so I appreciate those changes. The other thing was that I did have one other question from earlier. Mr. Settlemeyer had raised the issue of infill design standards. And I wanted to know, hear a little bit more about how that decision was made and what the effect would be of the way it is proposed in the revised language. Thank you.
Sure, I will take a first stab at that. Kathy covered a lot of the reasonings behind why we propose removing them. And the primary is that they wouldn't apply to middle housing. Now, we could keep them in and apply these to single family, but these standards, and just a little history, were first created back in 2000 when we adopted Great Neighborhoods. And one of the reasons for these standards actually was because a lot of manufactured homes were going into site-built neighborhoods, and they were going in with the skinny side facing the street and no front door and no garage. So the infill standards address the garage issue. The design standards address the front door. But so in the infill standards, we're talking about setbacks, front yard setbacks, trying to have the house or the dwellings be similarly spaced from the street so that you have a sort of a consistent line. And then the height, so that all the height is still the same in that zone, 30 feet in most zones. But the design standards would prohibit a 3-story house from going next to a single-story house. So it's the one standard. Setbacks haven't really been an issue. I haven't seen a 3-story house proposed or one next to a single story existing single family dwelling. So that's the one standard that I haven't seen come into play that could maybe have an impact. But the one that we always hear about is the infill standards require either a garage or a carport when 75%, or I think it's when more than half, a majority of the houses within 150 feet on either side on the same side of the street have a garage. And if it's a garage or carport, then there's a formula. It's usually a garage. Well, garages are a little bit costly. This came up with a habitat development. I felt really terrible. They actually had to put in garages at great expense because it was an infill property. So it ends up requiring garages. A lot of people do want to build them, but I honestly have not seen, they've been a little bit challenging to enforce. We've tried to clarify them, but I don't know that they've resulted in any different development by having them in there, or greatly different development or impacts in the neighborhood. And it just seemed weird to only apply these to single family development and not to middle housing. And we found that they have had more negative consequences really than positive. While they were well intended, we just couldn't find a good reason to keep them there, but that's for you to determine. I don't know if that answers your question. And when it comes to the historic districts, there are design standards for new construction. All infill developments still would need to meet the design standards and need to meet setbacks in the zone, the height, the building height. And then in the historic districts, you would look at scale and of course, architectural character and detail, that kind of thing. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's no other questions. I don't see any. I would like to know, for the townhomes, are they going to be built to the standard where they can be mortgaged, they can be financed through a FHA loan? I've heard several times from other mayors and reading online articles that people build condominiums and townhomes that aren't built so they can be financed with FHA loans or VA loans. Is this being taken into consideration with the type of housing we're going to build?
Mayor, I know this is a really important question because we do want that home ownership opportunity, especially for those that want or need to have a FHA loan or VA loan. I talked to some mortgage lenders, and they said that dwellings that are on land and they own the land underneath are not a challenge for FHA and VA loans. So I'm not sure where you're hearing it, but it's a little different than the condominiums because you've got, in the townhouse situation, it's 1 unit per lot, you own the land. If you were to go back and divide any other middle housing type where like the cottage clusters, each cottage would be on its own land, right? Even a triplex or a fourplex, if they weren't stacked, the ones that are side by side, you should not have as many obstacles as if they were stacked units. That was my research when it came up, when we first started this process. Actually, I did some research. It came up in one of your earliest work sessions, and I haven't gone back out to talk to folks, but that was my understanding based on, I talked to two different people. And Kathy may want to add to that, because in Portland, they have more middle housing types, and she may have some more familiarity with lending up there, but didn't find it to be a challenge here based on the people I talked to locally.
We certainly do hear that, condominiums can be challenging, but as Anne points out, I think townhouses by definition, while they're attached, they are 1 unit on its own lot. And I've been under the understanding that those are, relative, compared to a condominium, they're going to be relatively simple. It's fee simple ownership of the land, admittedly an attached product. Is there something specific that you've heard about where it's
No, I asked because I've heard about condominiums in some cities and also townhomes being difficult to finance with FHA loans. So I'll go back to my sources and find out what's actually happening.
It'd be good to know. We don't have any there is a, let's see, the code generally, obviously the builders are going to have to comply with the International Building Code. So those standards are going to apply to new construction. If you're going through say, for example, if you were to build a triplex and then want to go through a middle housing land division that's required by SB 458, one of the requirements for that land division is compliance with the applicable structural building code. So, if you built it as multifamily and you didn't put in the appropriate firewall, say between the units, you would have difficulty, I think, complying with that standard. So you'd have to, if you were building the triplex with the intention of dividing it along the shared common wall lot lines, I think you would, because of that criteria, you would have to have taken that into account when you constructed the unit.
All right, thank you.
Other than that, I can't think of an issue specific to the building code that would come up with that we would be addressing in the development code. But if you find anything, I'd be interested to know.
Okay, thank you. I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Novak.
Thank you. I'm just going to lower my hand real quick so I don't forget. All right. So that was a question that I also wanted to ask. I know in the past during some of the other work sessions, I believe Councilor Olson brought this up about home ownership. And when we reviewed again tonight, the plan with the different sized, which you said were not to scale, but the different sized units on a cottage cluster, and you talked about each one being on its own piece of land. I can't remember the right name for that term, but so I just wanted to see if I heard correctly, and forgive me for having to reiterate because I have to sometimes say it more than once, hear it more than once for it to truly sink in. But my hope is that these middle housing situations are providing actual home ownership opportunities for at least a segment of the population. I know not everyone wants to own a home, but I also know that when you do own it, you're more invested, you take better care, the neighborhood is better. So I would like to know that people would have an option to buy that piece of land and own whatever's on it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've heard correctly. So one of the changes from when we first started talking about this project to now is the passage of SB 458. And that changed the rules for land divisions of middle housing. And so now the developer obviously has the option. They don't have to divide their middle housing development, but they can choose to. And the city has to, there are some rules, but it's pretty specific and prescriptive to what the city can and can't require. So for example, those cottage cluster lots, there was a question earlier about the lot size. So the parent parcel that the cottage cluster is built on has to comply with the minimum lot size of the zone. So when you build that cottage cluster, it has to meet that minimum lot size, be it 7,000 square feet, 10,000, whatever that is. But when you subdivide that through a middle housing land division and you put those cottages each on their own lot, those do not have to meet those, what we call child lots, don't have to meet that minimum lot size. And they don't have the same dimensional requirements, obviously, as a standard, as the parent lot would have been subject to. So there's a lot of flexibility there and a lot more opportunity. So yeah, that issue that came up early on and those concerns have been in large part addressed through the passage of SB 458 and the subsequent changes to the code to comply with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Does anyone? Okay, so public testimony. I will call on those who registered to speak first and followed by those who did not. So let me get back to my list here. The first person that signed up to speak is Mr. John Robinson. Please turn on your camera and.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. You have 3 minutes, sir.
All right, terrific. I'm John Robinson. I reside at 2500 Del Rio Court Southeast in Albany. I'm a general contractor. And you should have my comments on that page that was mentioned before. And so I'll kind of be brief so we don't belate this thing. But basically, yeah, I testified at the Planning Commission, and they really didn't take my suggestion to heart. Fortunately, we have Ann Catlin, who I found to be a superb city employee, and she was more than willing to listen to me. And she's just done a fantastic job as far as I'm concerned in meeting a lot of the concerns that I had. And so my biggest concern was of that 22-foot separation between driveways, because the projects that I've been building do have a quiet wall and require separate driveways as part of the design standard. And I'm trying to move housing in a different direction than the old style shared driveways that have been out there for 40 and 50 years. And so Ann got really creative and wrote this section 8.140, and I totally agree with it. And I think she did a fantastic job, and I can't say enough good things about it. To kind of reiterate some of the points that were made, when we put garages on these, triplex or fourplex or whatever, probably the smallest and most common driveway or common garage, let me go back to the garage, would be 12-foot wide. They would have an 8-foot garage door to get your car in, but you need about 12 foot to open both doors to get people in and out and around the car. So 12 foot is kind of what the industry is standardized on. And so it makes sense to me if we have a 12-foot garage that we're going to have a 12-foot piece of concrete drive out in front of it. To neck down that driveway to 10 feet doesn't really do anything for me. I can't see any benefit in it, basically. So you'd have a foot on one side and a foot on the other side. I don't think that gives you enough room for a yard or any significant landscape in that area. So my preference would be that we'd take that 12-foot drive all the way to the street. If we have 4 of those, that's where I need 48 feet. And that's the reason I'm making the suggestion to go from 40 feet to 48 feet. And at the same time, move from 50% to 60%, because it's not just the building width, it's the lot width that applies to. So it depends on, if we had my fourplex, it's 80 feet. If we put that on a 100-foot lot, then that's where those percentages come in. And there's really so many variables with these infill lots that we're not going to be able to think of everything. So allowing a little bit higher standard number by going to 48 feet, by going to 60%, it's going to blanket a lot of that. It's going to keep us from having to go back for a type 3 change to get something done. My preference really is for more off-street parking than on-street parking, because on-street parking is not guaranteed. So if somebody's going to rent one of these, duplex, fourplex, whatever, to have guaranteed parking makes sense. The benefit is that if you're going to build it and you're going to put a garage on, and I believe that the market drives that. So I believe that people that want to rent these, or if we subdivided them and they wanted to buy them, they're going to want a garage. Whether they put their car in there or not, they're going to want a garage. And so the market drives that. So my point is, there really isn't any extra cost to a builder. If you have a 12-foot garage on one of these, you're going to have a 12-foot driveway outside of it. You already have 2 parking spots, 1 parking spot inside the garage, 1 parking spot in the driveway outside the garage. And so that's where Ann and her genius came up with this, 8.140, and the fact that I like to have 2 parking spots. And so she's basically given us that option. It does not dictate that. Every builder doesn't have to do what I'm doing. They don't have to provide 2 parking spots, but it allows us that option. And so that's kind of what I think. And so I've made these recommendations in there. I won't go through all of them, but they're in print. They're mostly in 8.165, and it would be a simple minor change. Additionally, in the 8.140, it mentions the street provisions, which is in 12.100. And so since 12.100 ties back to some other stuff in section 8, I just thought it would be clean if we also mention the 8.140 in the 12.100, just to kind of cross-reference it. It's just my suggestion, just a clerical thing. But basically, I'm supporting all this middle housing. I'm supporting, what everything's done. I just can't say enough good things about Ann. I just think that if we just make these extra little changes, then it's going to just push it over the top. So my My desire for council is to kick this back to staff to incorporate these minor changes, but I'm in total support of everything. And I just think this is going to make it a lot better for us. So listen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Appreciate that. Well, we'll take that under advisement. Next and Alexis Biddle make it in?
No, Mayor, Alexis is not able to attend tonight, so you can move on. The Thousand Friends did submit a letter that came to you this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. We're going first. So next up for the floor is we'll go Scott Letman or Cameron Sotomayor. Those floors. Let's go with Cameron Sotomayor. You can go, sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So we met with Ann a few times and we're in support of mental housing. In fact, I've been hoping for this for 20 years because I believe it'll help affordability and availability of housing of all types. We submitted a letter, Candace prepared, addressing some concerns we had regarding driveway standards, development standards. They addressed some of the things that Mr. Robinson addressed, which were driveway standards, and then also when you're trying to develop something, you're trying to create something of value that not only the market would like, right? But it's not only the market that needs to like it, it's your lender that needs to like it, that's giving you a construction loan. And so even though, you know, I'm here as I'm an appraiser, but as a developer, you can't, as a developer, do anything without buying financing. So a lot of lots, if you have a lot of ground, you could be very creative in creating the lots. But if the lots are already created, then you have an infill. And since we've been trying to do stuff in Albany, there's a amazing plethora of rules that you could not even imagine that just hamstring what you're trying to do is create value in the market and value, because otherwise it won't be built. So anyway, we're really supportive of the changes. I think they're a long time coming. I don't think they're going to really address housing affordability. There's it's going to help, but it's not going to be everything that we need, but it's a great start. And I don't know if you have any comments.
Well, I want you to tell them, go over those,
Oh.
especially the limiting the depth of development of a parcel.
Well, I'd like you to address those. I think you'd be better at that than me.
I'm just gonna hit our comments, the driveway standards abutting an alley. We just recently received approval for 8 townhomes on Southeast 3rd Avenue. And we had 4 single car garages off of 3rd Avenue and 4 single car garages off of the alley. All of them were attached to the unit itself. And the depth of the lot, we would not have been able to achieve 8 units if we had not done that type of a layout, which also provided for 20 feet of separation and outdoor space between the units. And so we're asking that in section 8.150, that it says that at least at a minimum, 50% of the driveway accesses have to occur from an alley, and that you could have 50% off of a street. On our second one is the development standards, minimum lot depth in residential zones such in the RS10. The minimum lot depth is 100 feet. Scott has a parcel where if we divided it and met the street standards, we would only be able to have a depth of 96 feet on both sides of the road. And it doesn't really matter about the depth of the lot as it matters in the square footage of the lot and the width of the lot. So we're asking that the development standard as far as depth of a lot be eliminated.
Well, I think, why is there, if the lot is 10,000 square feet, why does it have to have any dimensions at all? Right, particularly since there's issues related to topography
Well,
and
the
natural resources.
reason that I
So,
said
so I
that,
think
and
we're getting into, are we testifying or getting into solving their problem?
no, we're trying to solve a problem, because the reason I said just to eliminate the depth, because in North Albany, the width isn't such a problem, but in other residential zones where you may have a 40-foot minimum standard or a 60-foot, and most of the houses that are already developed to that standard, it would be more consistent.
Okay. All right, have these comments been sent into the staff?
Yes, all of these, you have all of these in your packet, I believe.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So we'd like to move on to the next speaker. We have the stuff in our packet. That's gonna guess that was Cameron Sotomayor. Thank you, Scott. Is Mr. Sotomayor here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Cameron Sotomayor. I live at 2307 7th Avenue Southwest in Albany. And while increasing housing options in newly developed areas has benefits, DC 0221 will have negative compatibility and affordability impacts on infill in already established neighborhoods. As the value of Albany's downtown has increased, which is a good thing, it also increases the value and the development pressure on the surrounding areas. There is protection for some of that right by downtown in the Hackelman and Monteith National Historic Districts. However, you get just outside of these districts, just to the west of the Monteith National Historic District out by West Albany High School and east of the Hackelman District. This is where the small, affordable World War II and post-World War II housing resides in Albany. This is where the single-story minimal traditionals and the early ranches are. These houses are small. They're typically around 900, maybe 1,200 square feet. Many of these have been surveyed by SHPO as eligible for the National Historic Register. However, they're not listed on the register and have no protection whatsoever under Article 7. This is Albany's true affordable housing. These are the entry-level homes that allow people to start to build wealth. I had no net worth or almost no net worth when I was renting when living up in Portland. Buying an entry-level home allows a person to build wealth. Fixed mortgages, fixed mortgage rates mean no rent increases. You build no equity by renting. All the housing wealth goes to real estate developers and investors. DC 0221 removes compatible infill standards for single-family homes in what was Albany Development Code 8.140. This is on Agenda Packet 111 to 118. It removes the matching setbacks and it removes the matching heights. So there was a bullet point earlier that said there was no change to height limits, and that's true in a lot of cases, but in certain cases, when you're talking about removing a home and building a new home within an existing area, it actually does change the height limits. Removing the standards makes it easier to replace existing small affordable homes with larger homes. No one tears down a house to build a more affordable house. And I sent you a recent study by Place Economics that found newly constructed middle housing rented for twice as much as the existing surrounding housing. And I also sent you a real world example that's happening right now on 1216 Walnut Street, where there was a very small 826 square foot house, had an RMV, real market value according to the Lynn County Assessor of 196K. That's now being replaced with a much larger house. As housing prices continue to climb, as the value of the downtown area and people wanting to live near downtown continue to climb, you're going to see ever increasing pressure to replace affordable small houses with larger houses. Removing the infill standards of Albany Development Code 8.140 does not meet the historic compatibility standards of Comprehensive Plan Goal 5. It does not meet the affordable housing of Comprehensive Plan Goal 10. And there is nothing in House Bill 2001 that says infill standards for single family homes must be removed. And I believe that also applies to duplexes. So I ask that the original Albany Development Code 8.140 infill standards concerning setback and heights not be removed, as allowed as much as possible under the law.
Thank you very much. Is that it, Mr. Solomar? Thank you very much. So we'll take all of that under advisement. And let me see what now. Well, does any staff member wish to respond? Oh, excuse me. Anybody that did not register would like to speak to address the council? Hearing none. Does any staff member wish to respond to any of the testimony presented?
I don't have any thing to add at this point, but I'd be happy to answer any questions council may have in regards to testimony heard this evening.
Council, any questions? I see no questions. Having said that, I do declare this public hearing closed at 7:23 p.m. December 21st. We're going to return council deliberations, discuss any staff questions, the motions or consideration or email. Do you got council any motions? Councilor Johnson?
Yes, I'm sorry. I couldn't get my hand raised before you closed it. We got a letter from a Mr. Haynes about a flag lot, and I wanted to ask about that.
That's a procedural question. Do I need to open the public hearing again, Sean?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, if we're gonna discuss something and to go back and forth with it, we would have to open the meeting.
That's okay. I can ask my question of staff later.
Okay.
Because he had a specific lot he's talking about, so I think we're okay. Thank you anyway.
Okay.
Councilor Smith?
I would like to ask Ann Catlin for a list of the recommended changes that came up in tonight's meeting.
Okay.
Changes that are going to be made in the code.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
So in addition to your supplemental materials, what I heard tonight was a request from Councilor Bartholomew to change, gotta flip back my notepad here. The language in on page 155 of your packet, section 10.280, number 2A, little 6, change breast height to 4.5 feet in height. I mean, I think we make that change. And then the specific requests, I mean, I could go through the letters, the written letters. I think the first and the summary of the verbal testimony was very helpful. So Mr. Robinson requested that you consider in Article 8, the design standards and driveway standards for triplexes and fourplexes. And I'm just trying to flip to that. I think it's 8.160 or 165, sorry. Number 1, that you increase the 50% of street frontage maximum for driveways to 60%. And then in 2A, change the total width of all driveway approaches must not exceed from 40 feet to 48 feet. And then you would make a similar change in 8.1652 B little 2. And then that would trigger a change to the maximum 24-foot wide driveway approach. So he didn't talk about that one. I haven't read, really absorbed that change, but he did talk about the 50% going to 60% and the 40 feet going to 48 feet. This would apply to triplexes and fourplexes. Then we had, I think next in the verbal testimony, we had Scott Letman request as an item that I would say isn't really necessarily related to middle housing, about the request to consider allowing only 50% of homes abutting an alley to have all garages face the alley. And this is, while we talked before the meeting, this is something that I think it goes beyond, and we'd want some public input on. If we had a public process that this is related in the downtown zones, it's 8.150. We updated those zones and did some amendments a couple of years ago. And actually with all these amendments, some of them might be fairly simple. Some of the ones I've just mentioned, you might want to consider carefully whether you want to include them in this packet, especially if we haven't noticed the public about these amendments. And that would be in particular to section 8.150, that request. And we will be looking at other standards that may be obstacles to developing housing and a few other efforts. So the next he mentioned, and Candace sort of talked about it, removing the the minimum depth for residential lots. And that is something that I think staff could support, because I think the width is much more important in terms of ensuring that we have street frontage for new development. The lot size is really going to determine the dimensions. And if you've got a certain minimum lot width, then the lot depth just, it happens automatically. So they could request a minor variance maybe for some situations, but there are probably lots out there that are not, most lots are not a rectangle or a square and may not meet the lot depth, especially in RS10 where the depth is 100 feet. So there's a request to remove the depth standard in Article 3. And then the other one is, it's in Article 12. It would be currently the city requires all single family and middle housing driveways to be at least 10 feet wide. And I don't know, the request is that they only be 8 feet wide. So those are what I heard verbally. And then Mr. Settlemeyer is requesting that you reconsider keeping the infill standards related to height and setbacks, but it sounded like he is not interested in keeping the garage requirement setback. There were some other requests in the letters related to not requiring any parking for middle housing, and also to consider detached middle housing types. And we feel that many of these suggestions would warrant further analysis, and we could adopt the package with a few minor amendments and consider others so that Planning Commission would have a chance to weigh in, and the public as well. That may be something you want to think about. And regardless, we would want to get your input, of course, as to what you'd like to consider, and bring that back to you at the next council meeting to ensure that we got it right. And that we'd have enough time to do an analysis and look at any unintended consequences.
I like the sound of that. Councilor Smith, did you have more information?
I was just going to comment that I would like to continue moving forward and adopt what we can this evening, and then bring back the items that require additional public input, potentially review by the Planning Commission and so on, at a later date.
Thank you very much. And I feel the same way. Councilor Kopczynski.
Echoing what Councillor Smith just mentioned, I move that the city council adopt as modified the ordinance that would amend the Albany Comprehensive Plan and Albany Development Code as identified in exhibits and amendments that we received today to the exhibits as presented by staff in the supplemental materials dated November 30th and referenced under planning files CP 0321 and DC 0221. This motion is based on the findings and conclusions in November 18th staff report and findings in support of the decision made during deliberations on this matter. Proposed modifications include, which were the ones that we received this afternoon in the mail or in email.
Second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign.
Aye. I can't see you rushing through this when they're, particularly Mr. Settlemeyer's comments.
Comments, and we also have the public record, the stuff he sent in.
We also said we're going to be addressing more of these verbal changes that came down tonight before this all gets settled by the end of before the June 22nd date, whatever that is.
So return to the agenda now.
Clarification, please.
Yes.
This means that this ordinance will come back at the next meeting. Is that correct?
Sounds like to me.
So, Mayor, you don't want to have first reading tonight?
Would the city attorney please read the ordinance in title only?
Yes. An ordinance amending ordinance number 4836, which adopted the City of Albany Comprehensive Plan, and amending ordinance number 4441, which adopted the City of Albany Development Code by amending the Albany Development Code text and adopting findings.
Move to read the ordinance a second time in title only.
Oh, I'll second that.
We have a second?
Yes.
Yes, you did.
City attorney?
Well, we have to have a vote on it, Your Honor. They'd have to vote for.
That's pretty true. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
I'm opposed.
So it'll come back to at the next meeting for the second reading.
All right, thank you very much. We'll bring that back to the next meeting. Next on the agenda, back to my bigger agenda, is business from the public. And we have one person signed up to speak with us tonight. Thank you very much for your patience. Executive Director Lisa Grotto, of the Downtown Association.
Good evening. Can you hear me tonight?
Yes.
Yes. Great. So happy holidays. I'm Lisa Grotto. I'm the Executive Director of the Albany Downtown Association. And I just wanted to thank the City of Albany for your support and partnership with all of our holiday cheer. You may have seen the beautiful snowflakes along our downtown streets. They're funded by donations as well as TLT funds and hung each year by the Albany Public Works team. So I hope you're enjoying those. The community Christmas tree arrived on Monday. The Weyerhaeuser team selected a beautiful noble fir, and with the help of Ram Trucking, they delivered it to Two Rivers parking lot on Monday. Pacific Power expertly lifted it into place. It was very big and a little scary. Tuesday and today, the City of Albany Public Works team added lights and ornaments that are provided by the Downtown Association. But we still need more help. A call was made today. The tree is too tall. So tomorrow, Albany Fire Department will rescue us, and they will add the star at the top with their hook and ladder. So thank you. Sunday is the Downtown Twice Around Christmas Parade, and we'd like to thank Albany Police Department for their help each year with that. And the Albany Downtown Association invites everyone to attend the 21st almost annual Downtown Twice Around Christmas Parade. Had a little glitch last year with not having a parade. It starts at 5 p.m. and it's followed by the community tree lighting ceremony. Appreciate that Mayor Alex Johnson II and a special guest will light the tree with the help of Santa, of course. And I want to make sure that everyone in the public and council Notes that there's a lot of room to spread out and physically distance along the route. And we will have a little extra time for you to move from your seats over to the tree area where there's also lots of room in that big parking lot, so everyone can be safe. Many of our downtown bakeries and coffee houses are going to be open special hours with coffee and cocoa and special treats available for folks. And more information is available on our website and in our December newsletter, which you should be seeing in your email boxes tomorrow, I would think, hopefully at the city. So I just wanted to thank everyone on the council and all the city department heads and folks who are here this evening for making this possible. And we're so happy to be back.
Thank you very much, Executive Director.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda, item 5, approval of contract amendment, Cartograph Systems. Dave Twenge or Twenge. I'm sorry about massacring your name. Is he there?
Is that working now?
Yes. Did I massacre your name? I'm sorry if I did.
Yeah, that's okay. I hear that all the time with a last name like that.
How do you pronounce it?
Twenge.
Twenge, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And good evening, everyone, Mayor, councilors. I'm here from Public Works. I have a team that keeps track of all the assets that we take care of in Public Works. There's hundreds of thousands of them. We use software to do that, and we've been using it for about 10 years now. The software is called Cartograph Systems, and I'm here to request your approval of a contract with Cartograph and a renewal for yearly support for a 2-year period for $149,000. The software works very well for us. It's grown every year that we've had it. Went from a pretty small demonstration system to now we've got like close to 100 users on the system. So.
Is that it, Mr. Twenge? Is there any other discussion? Did he drop out on us? Is he still with us?
Mayor, I think he has a rough connection, and that's why his video isn't on. But I think that's basically it. This is just a renewal contract and continuing our agreement with Cartograph. And the other details are in the memo. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Council, thank you very much, Director Bailey. Is there any questions, Council? So do I have a motion to approve or motion? Oh,
we approve the use of cartograph systems, and extend it for 10 years as per the written information we have.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, say no. Thank you very much, Mr. Twenge and Director Bailey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is the adoption of a resolution applying for assistance firefighters grant for new engine. Fire Chief Wooten is going to speak with us today.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor, Council, staff. I'll be really brief here. We have a 30-year-old fire truck that is in need of being replaced. And as we go through the process of replacing it, we thought it'd be wise to see if there was some grant monies out there to make that happen. So this is us requesting permission to apply for a grant to replace the fire truck. There is a 10% portion that we would be responsible for, but we have that money in our equipment replacement fund. So just seeking approval to apply for a grant. End of report. Answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Chief. Any councilor have any comments or questions for the Chief? Councilor Johnson?
Yes, I just want to say I really appreciate it when any department head or staff take the initiative to get out there and get those grants, because at least this way you'll get your fire engine. I mean, I'm sure we're going to be approved. I mean, I'm optimistic about that, but I do appreciate the extra work going for those grants. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to our staff or my entire team that puts in a lot of time to try to make that happen.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. We have a resolution on page 236. Do I have a motion?
Move to adopt the resolution as presented.
Seconded.
Motion, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you very much, Chief. Have a good, I saw you early this afternoon. Good afternoon. Have a good day now. Okay, next up is approval of a sole source procurement. Against Convergent Technologies, Shane Wooten, Chief Wooten, and Chief Arden on page 237.
I'll take this one for Shane. We both have a couple things on tonight, so we're gonna bounce back and forth. Good evening, Mayor and councilors. This is a request for to waive the competitive bidding for Convergent Technologies. Again, I'll keep it brief. It's been a long night. When we built the fire station and police station in 2017, this is the system we went to. It's our card key access and some of our security protocols. The new fire station in Millersburg will have the same. To switch away from this company will be really very, very expensive, almost cost prohibitive. So we're asking to waive the competitive bidding process and go and stay with Convergent Technologies. It's joint venture funding from both police and fire budgets for $25,000 for the contract. The cost to replace the system, go a different direction, would be exponentially higher. So we're asking for approval from the council to waive the competitive bidding process.
Council, any questions for the chief? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
I would move to adopt the resolution on page 239.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Follow
Got you.
order.
Those opposed say no. Motion passes, Chief. Thank you very much for your
Thank you very
presentation.
much. Have a good evening.
Yeah.
Let me get back to the next thing. That was funny. Oh my God. Adoption of the item 8 is adoption of the consent calendar. Council, anything?
One comment.
Okay.
Item A, removing a commissioner. I just wanted to point out that this is something that happens very, very rarely. But it is a reminder that when people accept appointment to serve on a city board or commission, they're expected to serve. And I don't know what the reasons are behind this lack of service, but it's just a reminder that it is an important commitment of a citizen's time. So I hope Councilor Kopczynski has an easy time replacing this commissioner.
Thank you for that vote of support.
You're welcome. I would move to adopt the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Those opposed say no.
Yeah, tricky.
Next up is item 9, business from the council. First up on my screen is Councilor Johnson.
Oh, great. I was going to say it when Director Grotto was on, but I want to say every year I just love those snowflakes. They're so beautiful. And especially with the regular lights, it's just kind of like a double whammy going down Ellsworth. And I've had comments on that from people who normally, don't really say much, but they say coming over that bridge and looking at that it just puts them in the spirit. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Kopczynski, you're next.
I would like to compliment Ann Catlin and her staff and the rest of the city folks that work on the code revisions. I mean, talk about making you need to wear glasses if you didn't have them before. That is some serious in-depth reading, and I cannot honestly say that I've got my arms around 110% of it, not by any stretch of imagination. But we've got good staff and good professional people, and they're doing a yeoman's job under some tight deadlines, and I compliment them on that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Olson.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I wanted to report a very nice conversation with Cody Mann, who is the reporter at the Democrat Herald covering City Hall now, actually covering City Hall. We're getting more attention from the paper than we've had for a long time, and I really appreciate that. We have a new editor, an almost entirely new news staff in the last 6 months, and they care about what's going on. And so we're seeing more in-depth coverage of activities at City Hall here and in Lebanon. And I just really appreciate that. A community without a community newspaper isn't much of anything. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. And you being a reporter, that means a lot. Councillor Kopsinski.
Yes, in regarding a local newspaper, there's a phenomenal OPB PBS documentary called Storm Lake, Iowa, about a very, 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 very small newspaper in Storm Lake, Iowa that won the Pulitzer Prize, and how they've survived COVID and are just hanging on by the skin of their teeth. But it's an excellent showcase of why we need local newspapers.
Thank you. Councillor Novak, you're next up.
Thank you. I have a couple items. One, I heard from a constituent last week, and he lives in North Albany in the Benton Woods area. And he was asking me about speed bumps. He says that folks in this neighborhood, they're supposed to go 25 miles per hour, but they're going a whole lot faster, and there are lots of children. And I wasn't sure who to reach out to. I don't know if this is what developers handle, or if the city, has any part in making neighborhoods safer with speed bumps. But I wanted to bring that to general attention, if I may.
Yeah, I forwarded that same message. He sent me a message as well. I sent it to staff. Thank you very much for bringing that up. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that wasn't all. Thank you, sir.
No,
I have more.
I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm waiting for them to answer they want to answer your question.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, City Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. I was just going to recommend to Councilor Novak that she send that person to me, and I will make sure that it gets to Ron Irish, to the appropriate people, and we'll take a look at that.
Thank you. Thank you. I haven't shared anything in a while, and now I have like 3 of them. So the other thing, I guess a little bit, it has to do with the city newspaper, and I'm glad to know that we're going to have more reporting. But a friend of mine brought to my attention a pretty tragic situation where a man was crossing the street on the east side of I-5 in that area where we're looking at doing a whole lot of building out. And he was struck by a vehicle and killed, 62-year-old gentleman. And I was really disheartened, as was my friend and constituent, that there was no local coverage of this. There was coverage from KEZI, but nothing local. So I would just want to encourage local reporters. I think that apparently there were 2 fatalities within 12 hours, and I never heard anything about it. So these things, I think they merit coverage. And on a happier note, I want to let everyone know, some of staff does know this, but I finally have the position filled on the HRC. Jamie Jones is going to be joining that group, and I'm very happy that she is willing to serve. And then finally, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the Downtown Association and the Visitors Association and all the things they do to make our town special and give it the homey, welcoming feel, and the downtown twice around parade, all these things that they do to make Albany a great place to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Novak. Counselor Bartholomew.
Thank you. I want to share a recent experience with a constituent who called and had some issues with getting their needs met through the Albany Police Department. I was able to call Marcia and she walked me through the steps, and I was able to help that person, and it had a very good outcome. So I'm very grateful for our staff. And so I wanted to highlight Chief Harden and also hop on the bandwagon with our staff here tonight and all that they have done. So thank you.
So Counselor Smith.
Thanks. I just wanted to back up to Councilor Novak's first issue about the speed bumps in Benton Woods, and to add to what the city manager said, the place to start for most people with requesting changes in traffic control in a neighborhood is our neighborhood traffic calming program, which is on the city website under Public Works. It's a project for neighbors to take on themselves to help count cars and anyway, to document the situation. They will end up working with Public Works and potentially the Traffic Safety Commission, but there is work required by the neighbors to help document what the issue is to start with. So it's all there. It's very detailed, and it provides good substantive, objective information to work with.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So are you done, Councilor Bartholomew? You are? I only have a few things.
Yes.
One, I'm hoping that all of you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I was able to enjoy my family and wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving. I want to thank the staff for helping me put together a slide set for my first State of the City address this afternoon at the fairgrounds. It was a great turnout. I called on a few of the people in the room. So thank you, Director Rutgers, Manager Sherry, Fire Chief Wooten, and the City Manager Peter, and also I want to thank Matt Harrington for doing such a great job in helping me build a slide set. I did have a constituent call me regarding he didn't know, or people don't know that there's a old drug drop box inside the police department. So I took some pictures of it and I emailed them to him, and he didn't know. So maybe that's something we can highlight in the future, because people do have medications, especially seniors have expired medications. If they need somewhere to take them, we should want to make more noise about, or more public outreach about that box being there available for them. And then on Saturday night, the last Saturday night, no, it was this week, a gentleman called me and told me that somebody had spilled some oil. It looked like an intentional spill, and I had been libating, and so I went out the next morning. I met with them, and I did a video, and I sent it to Director Bailey, and immediately Director Bailey acted on it, and Kristen Preston reached out to me. So I'm really happy that they were able to get involved and get it done. And I'm hoping that we get it all rectified, but I'm going to thank Director Bailey for working on a Sunday, and also Kristen Preston for reaching out to me first thing. And now it's the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things. I was able to be at the chamber luncheon today and saw the mayor deliver a very good address. I'm sure it could have gone on for quite a while. There were quite a few questions, and we could have stayed there for quite a few more minutes. I wanted to bring your attention to a couple of promotions. Well, but first, let me first say that also at the luncheon, Lieutenant Shane Castle was recognized as the Firefighter of the Year, and that was a pretty good thing to see as well. So congratulations to Lieutenant Castle. Within the Planning Division, on Matthew Rutgers' staff, David Martineau, a name that you will recognize very well, has been promoted back to being the planning manager. So we're grateful that he's taken that position again. That, of course, left a hole for a planner 3, And Nikki Cross, who's joined our staff in the last year and has been performing admirably, has been promoted into that position. So those are some names that you'll know the Martineau name very well, but Nikki has been appearing quite often. You've seen her and you probably recall what a good job that she does. And the last thing I want to do is burst your bubble a little bit. You're not getting out of here right now. We do have an executive session to follow this when we adjourn. Mayor, thanks for the time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Where's the executive session piece? Okay, I have it. Oh, go ahead, please. Go ahead,
I'm
Councilor.
sorry. I was going to comment on your comment about the drug drop. Because of Bimart Pharmacy closing, we've gone over to Safeway, and there was an elderly couple in front of me last week, and they says, well, we need to drop off some drugs, and it said out of order, you know, they weren't taking any, but they also said that there was a charge. So that's very important that there's a place that they could take it without being charged.
So I didn't know that. Thank you for that. Is there something that we can do as far as letting seniors, people, not seniors, but people that want to destroy their drugs, to get them to the police department? Maybe some messaging on our website, or I think that's I don't think that's right to be charging people to get rid of medication that possibly hurt someone.
Mayor, I'll ask our social media person to do a couple pushes on it. She has scheduled those in the past. And they can come in anytime that our lobby's open and drop them off at no charge.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Councilor Johnson. I had no idea that they did that. Thank you. So now we're going to go to an executive session. The city council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of discussing litigation per ORS 192.6602H. Representatives of the news media and designated staff and other persons shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other participants will be moved into a waiting room, or you can leave and rejoin when they meet in a few minutes. Your screen will display the message, please wait, the meeting host will let you in soon. When the council returns to open session, participants remaining in the waiting room will be readmitted to the meeting. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report any other deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the reason for the session is previously announced. No decisions will be made in this executive session. I now recess to executive session time at 7:58 p.m. So I'm gonna go ahead and reconvene the regular session at 8:27 p.m. You can let people in.
And there's just one here, so. All right, there you go.
So for this particular item, I'm going to recuse myself and turn it over to the president of the council, Councilor Kopczynski.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. In this regard, I'm going to move that we indemnify Chris Bailey, Rob Romero, and John Goldman from potential litigation moving forward.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And with that, we are adjourned.
The next meeting will be Monday, December 13th.
City manager. Oh,
I was waving good night to you.
Well, the next meeting is December 13th at 4 p.m.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.